ICM has been that there's an annual research conference. And at that research conference, they had a panel discussion. And in that panel discussion, there was a topic which, what about jobs for people who come out of PhDs? And they had two research labs, Microsoft, Google, and then they had two IITs as faculty members. So I was trying to challenge this group in saying that, hey, because someone has done a PhD, does it really have to be that they have to join a research lab, and do they have to join a research institution? But actually, the PhD is a good training for being an entrepreneur. And why aren't we encouraging people who have completed their PhD to think about entrepreneurship? So then when you suggest something, typically someone will come and say, okay, if you say so, tell us what it means. Okay, so that's how this thing got set up. All right. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about how this today's talk is going to be all about. And I want this to be a conversation to the extent possible. So it is pretty hard to do this on a YouTube kind of a format, but I encourage you to ask your questions online. There are several people who are listening to it. I'm going to take pauses in between and answer questions or have a discussion in between. And what I wanted to do was to see how this could be a useful session for many of you. Most of what I'm going to present has lots of references here and references to books and other literature. We will make the presentation available to you. So in case you feel like reading over it later on, that should be possible. So I'm going to use this format for today. So first, I want to congratulate all of you. As Professor Sahasrabudhe already mentioned, only 6% of those who graduate from undergrad actually end up going to the master's program. So you are already a privileged bunch. You have done really well to get to where you are. And a small number of these are going to be PhD students and completing PhD. So even more sort of specialized, smaller group, tighter knit group. So I highly want to congratulate you and thank you for all of this stuff. I think we all sort of grow up in this mindset constraint that says that if you have done a PhD, you must continue to do research for life. And researchers cannot be entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship and research don't go together at all in some form or the other. So, what I want to share with you today is to break this myth of saying that, just because you did a PhD doesn't mean you must do research for life. And also, even if you want to do research and entrepreneurship can go hand in hand, and they're not that different from each other. And it's a rewarding experience and an exciting experience to be an entrepreneur researcher and a researcher who is an entrepreneur. So I'm going to share a little bit about this. And this whole picture that I have here about this elephant is that what happens is that when an elephant is very young, he's tied to a small pole like this, and he somehow feels like he cannot get away. He tries in the beginning and then he finds he cannot run away. Even though the elephant grows, the pole remains the same because the elephant somehow is conditioned to believe that he cannot run away. So this is what has happened to many of our PhD students who somehow believe that research or teaching is the only option for them. And that's what I want to discuss with you and show you that by doing your PhD, you have possessed or you have learned the most important skills of entrepreneurship. And there I want to say that, you have already demonstrated that you are innovative, you are a beacon of innovation, you have found something new and unique that you have worked on for a long period of time, 3 5 years, you have worked on the same problem. So you have demonstrated that you have the ability to stay focused and you don't get distracted by random things, which is again very important for an entrepreneur. Persistence is very critical. And you are doing this in a contextually aware situation. So you are aware of the situation in which you are doing your PhD problem. You cannot just solve a problem without understanding the context in which you are delivering your thesis. So you have demonstrated all of these abilities, which are absolutely essential for someone who wants to complete your PhD thesis. And I congratulate you for demonstrating this. Now, if you look at entrepreneurship, these are exactly the same skills that you need. And hence, I'm trying to suggest to you that you should go about it. And as Professor mentioned, I've been very passionate about the Asra Foundation, which is a family foundation, and we are really focused on creating job creators. And I believe that all of you who are privileged should not suck out jobs for those which should be left for mere mortals. You are PhD guys, you are the master's people, you have done all of these kinds of great things. You should be the ones creating jobs for other people and not be demanding jobs. And I really believe that all of you should become job creators rather than job suckers in some sense. So, this is a little bit of a guilt trip for you all to keep this going. But anyway, so now let me get to this. Okay, fine. You agree with me that you have learned good stuff. You have had a journey of incredibly great opportunity to show your tenacity, focus, contextual awareness, persistence, and you have already figured that out. But now you say, okay, how do I go about being an entrepreneur? What do I need to do? And how does this all work? So in the next few minutes, or rather 25 to 40 minutes or so, I'm going to explain to you the three main things that you need to think about when you are trying to do entrepreneurship or starting your own business. One is to build an idea and validate that. The second important aspect I'm going to share is about team building. And the third important aspect is how do you manage your cash? And I'm going to give you good references to how to follow up on this. So clearly, you did your PhD problem. A lot of people think that just because I did this PhD problem, I should be good for the business. Now, your objective for your PhD problem was to ensure that your advisor is happy with the PhD problem and not necessarily thinking about the business. Yeah, let me take a short pause here and see if are there any questions or anything else that you think you want to discuss. Sir, am I making sense here? Do you agree that PhDs are very much like an entrepreneurial role?
Absolutely. I fully endorse and agree with that. And even stepping a little earlier, the very fact that identification of the problem, which you are already raising now, the guide to be happy, in fact, we all go to the library, internet, and try to hunt for the gaps that exist in the
Correct.
domain, and then try to find out that. So, same way for starting an entrepreneurial journey, somewhere where there are gaps, where there are no solutions, if you get into that, probably you will be more successful. And so I
Right.
think there are absolute parallel between what we do in PhD program and in the entrepreneurial journey.
Right. So, sir, I'm going to share now a little bit of ideas on how the business processes, so in startup world, I guess there are a lot of literature on this topic, which I think may be interesting and we should relate it to the PhD problem also. So I'm going to share with you the process of how people go about identifying the problem. And the most common or the one that I really like is this whole concept of lean startups. So I'm going to share a little bit about how lean startups work and you will see how that could be related to someone who's doing a PhD while you are doing a PhD, and how can you take that to get to this thing. Now, the PhD problem seems like a constant mess of things. You want to get from your idea to the PhD problem and your degree, and it seems like you don't seem to see that you're going to see the end of it. However, there is a process you follow, and let me explain to you how this process works. So let's to get started. I'm going to suggest that this is a body of work that has gone on for more than 50, 60 years around lean manufacturing. And the main objective of lean manufacturing is to reduce waste. And this is something that Toyota production system really, really focused on. And they spent a lot of time trying to explain how you can get the production system to work very well by reducing waste. And lean is really a journey of how you go about it to try to reduce waste. And the key exponents of lean are Edward Deming, who also did this in the US and in General Motors and others, and Taichi Ono from Toyota Manufacturing. And they really came up with this whole idea of reducing waste. Now, if you look at a startup and you look at the lean journey, what happens is that when you build a product or you're building a solution, you are starting from an idea and then evolving it over a period of time, and then you get and build a solution. And at that point, if you find out that, okay, this solution, I want to take it to the market, and you realize that it flops, then the whole time that you spent in building out this solution feels like it's completely wasted. So the whole idea about lean is that can I do this in a way that I can reduce the waste of iterations that I have to do from the process of my idea all the way to the product. And when I'm doing this iterative process, can I do this faster? And one of the most important ways of how this can be done faster has been thought of by this gentleman called Steve Blank. He used to be a founder of a various set of companies, including a company called Epiphany. And he then eventually became a professor at UC Berkeley. And he has created a program which is called a Launchpad class. And I think Sir may be aware of this. So Deshpande Foundation, along with actually Desh Deshpande and IIT Madras with Chris Gopalakrishnan, they have been working on taking this NSF's ICORPS program to India as well. And many of the PhD and faculty members are being encouraged to look at that. So this has come from Steve's work. Do you want to say anything about it, sir, on the program that you have with IIT Madras? I'm sure you're part of that as well.
No, I think it's very important that the learning from UC Berkeley in terms of ICOPS and Steve Blanks, as well as Desh Deshpande, he drives also another initiative of social entrepreneurship in Hubli, you
Yes.
know, and many other initiatives of Desh are very, very valid for Indian context, whether it is faculty development, whether it is research, innovation, as well as startups.
Correct. So he started this whole movement around lean startup movement, and one of the most well-known exponents of this is a student gentleman called Eric Ries, and he has written these two books called The Lean Startup and The Startup Way. These are absolutely phenomenal books in terms of how the whole process works, and there's a lot of literature on the lean startup, which are there. He runs courses which are several weeks. So I'm going to give you a 10-minute glimpse of what lean startup and the whole crux of this whole thing is all about and how to go about it. So, as I mentioned to you, one of the biggest challenges that we have when you do a startup or you build a company is you come up with an idea, you think that this is what the market needs, you build it out, maybe it takes you 6 months, takes you a year, 2 years, whatever. And at the end of it, you don't want it to be failing, right? So one of the ideas of this whole lean startup is can you do iterative processes so that you are incorporating various aspects of this in the process, including the customer who is a big part of it. So this whole concept of build, measure, learn. So that is really what he came back with. And his thing was that, okay, build experiments, baseline them, measure the metrics, analyze them, learn from it, and then you have to make a choice. Do you pivot or preserve? Preserve means, okay, I like what I've done so far, I continue with that journey. Or you pivot saying, oh well, this didn't work out, I want to make a change from that, go back to my revise my hypothesis, go back to build experiments, baseline, and you keep looping through this circuit over and over again. Does this not sound very similar to a PhD discussion? Exactly what you are doing, building experiments, baselining them, measuring metrics, analyzing them, deciding to pivot or preserve, and getting back to the experiments. So this is really the crux of the build, measure, learn loop. Um, Abhay, do you agree with this, sir? You have any comments?
Completely agree with you on this, and I think uh, when we are doing some of our innovation ambassador training programs, and when we are talking to some of the startups, student startups, which we are funding, we are talking about this, and along with that, we are also pushing the model fail early, fail fast kind of a thing, so that you can go back to your drawing board and reanalyze your strategy, so that you don't end up wasting time while you are coming working on your next set of ideas.
Right.
Uh,
So
Dr.
go ahead.
Anand, in fact, this is absolutely basic ethos of any individual. General knowledge, what I call. Because you look at a shop, for example, grocery shop, or a medical pharmacy shop, or even supermarket for that matter. What exactly is required to be stored, how much to be stored, and when it has to be, replenished. All of that they are doing by experience, and no one would like to stock unnecessarily and then waste the material. So I think this is all in the psyche of people. It's only that someone will use it and someone are not using it. We have to make them realize that actually.
Correct. So clearly, build, measure, learn is really the objective of what the Eric Ries and Steve Blank said. One other very important thing that Steve Blank said is that when you are doing all of this work of build, measure, learn, and all of these other ideas, and you're trying to decide the pivot, a lot of times researchers and people get into this sort of glass ceiling, glass buildings, or whatever else, where they are sitting in the top floor of their building and trying to make decisions. The reality of what Steve Blank says is there are no facts inside the building. So get the heck outside and talk to customers. And this is really the key of how businesses are built. When you are doing an experiment, you don't want to just do it amongst yourselves, but involve your customers at that point, right? And that's sort of where the whole objective of any particular business is to say, am I building to a problem that is relevant? Is there a solution that I've built that is relevant? Is this solution at a viable price that can be sold at the right point for large numbers of people? And then can we repeat this solution and scale our business? So this is really what is all about in terms of how a business is built. So again, just to summarize again, so you have a problem idea, you don't know if this is going to work. Well, involve the customers, create a hypothesis, build some experiments to validate that, then go measure if those experiments are working correctly. So you think that I have this particular product, which is a great video camera, it's going to work out, it's the best thing that has happened. Okay, build it, build a little bit, show it to people, and come back and then experiment with it, show it to customers, see what they think. Do they like it? Do they not like it? And then if they find that this is all working out and you are able to do it, preserve the experiment or pivot to something different. And one of the other topics that people talk a lot about is this whole concept of MVP, or the minimum viable product. And I think a lot of people get too hung up on the minimum part of it. The key is to build something that is viable. And if you look at this process of experimentation, what is it that you are trying to ask these questions about? What is my riskiest assumption? And what is the smallest experiment that I can do to test that riskiest assumption? And I'm sure you all who are doing PhDs or otherwise completely understand this. That you don't want to sort of find out that you have kept your riskiest assumption to be validated last, because by then you would be too late. So you might as well bring that in early, decide what your riskiest assumption is, and what is the smallest experiment that I can do to validate that. It is not saying that do the smallest experiment. You are doing the smallest experiment to validate the riskiest assumption. So this is really what minimum viable product is. And it's not about building something small and dirty and hoping that it works. It is about building the most viable product with the least smallest experiment that can be made sense. So this is really the principle of what people talk about in this whole concept of lean manufacturing, moving into lean startups. Of course, there's a lot of literature on this topic, and in 15-20 minutes, I'm trying to give you the gist of it. But the whole idea is it's a repetitive, iterative process. You go one step at a time, and there is a systematic way to validate whether you are making the right decision or not. And a lot of it depends on your ability to get to that point. So that's where it is. I'll take a short pause, see if there are any questions, and then I'll move to the next topic on which is related to this again.
No, currently there are no major questions. But Anand, when I am talking to many of the students about minimum viable product, many times they just fail to understand what it means to be a viable product, minimum viable product. Sometimes, and as you rightly said, many of the students end up doing quick and dirty kind of a product, which they think is a minimal viable product. So if you can highlight some of the good literature which these students can read on what actually means minimum viable product, then that will be of great use.
No,
you can do it at the end of the talk.
Let me answer very quickly right here. And what I'm saying is that, see, I have these books that I have included in this one. Actually, there are links on this one. But if you look for Lean Startup and some of the work done by Eric Ries and Steve Blank, you should be able to see enough discussion on minimum viable product. Lots of blogs. Actually, there is. It took me a lot of time to figure this out. But there is no shortage of literature on this topic. But one of the problems that happens is that when you have a lot of literature, people pick up these sort of slogans that people put out without necessarily understanding the details of those slogans. So that's really what I've tried to avoid by sort of saying that viability is equally important. And the whole objective of building a minimum viable product is to build that smallest experiment that addresses my riskiest assumption. So that's really what it is all about. Let me keep moving, and I want to share this amazing work done by Alex Osterwalder. And Alex Osterwalder's work is really amazing. I love his books. They are beautiful, but I'm going to talk today about this particular book that he has written, which is his first seminal work, in my opinion. It's called The Business Model Generation. So what they say is that, you have to take your business, and let's say you're building, so let's say you want to open a restaurant. You need to understand what is the value proposition of the restaurant, who are your customer segments, and this is the order in which you go about it. Okay, so first thing you do is to identify your customer segments. Who is this thing for, right? So, okay, I'm building a restaurant that is targeted to young people, or is it targeted to older people? Is it targeted to rich people? More expensive, less expensive? So, whatever it is. So, don't look at the customer as just one group, but break it into smaller segments that are much easier to understand. And for the segments that you are picking up, find a value proposition that is most appropriate for that customer. Figure out how are you going to reach them, how are you going to discuss with them, how do they find out about you, how do they come to you. And then on the other side, you look at key partners, key resources, and key activities. And then you tie this in with revenue streams and cost structures. So this is a very nice one-page model that people use a lot to try to validate if your business can be put together as a business. So yes, you do this value proposition exercise, you do these changes between things, and you can come back with this. Just to make this a little bit sort of real, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Airbnb example, which is something that I have picked from a reference that is there from his website. And I'm going to just use that to give you an example of how this works. So the first thing that people look at is who are my customers? So people who are traveling. Now, of those who are traveling, who would go to Airbnb? So they said, well, there may be budget travelers, there may be people who are on holidays, people who are locals looking for some extra income, unconventional travelers. So there are a whole bunch of different kinds of people who are the customers of Airbnb. Now, if I have to make this happen, what is the value proposition that Airbnb provides? Well, simple booking process, wide range of ways to get people to put their home up for, for the right things, competitive rates. So, if I'm putting my house up for Airbnb for people to use, I don't know how much to charge. Now, Airbnb will tell me that, okay, if you're charging in this locality, in this neighborhood, at this time of the year, at this rate, you should be okay because they have an understanding of what the setup is. They also guide you in terms of how to go about it. And then of course, there are various mechanisms of how you connect with these people. So this is a very commonly used technique that I highly recommend, where you sort of take your business and try to map it to these nine different areas, and you define your business. So on one page, you are able to see where is the money coming from, who's going to be, where do you spend your money, where are the costs coming in, what are the key resources, who are your key partners, who are the key activities that you need to do, how do you manage all this stuff. So this is a nice one pager of how you define your entire business on one page. So this has become super popular, and there are examples of this online of LinkedIn and other things, and I don't necessarily want to go into this. And there is another set of things that people talk a lot about is how design thinking plus lean startup and agile, all of these are coming together. But if you really think about it, it's all about the same thing: is how do I identify the problem? So some of the design thinking techniques can be very useful in trying to identify it. And then you design the experiment, you try to learn across it, pivot, and then keep doing the same thing again and again. So this is really how businesses are built. And again, just to summarize, what I'm saying is you cannot build business in isolation. You have to ask the customers what you're doing, as is making sense or not. And if you are able to get it all together, then that's where the business happens. I'm going to take a short pause here and see if this relates. And I'm going to change a little bit and give you another technique that is very commonly used, and I love it because it's really simple, but it's very nice. And this has come from none other than Clayton Christensen, who's I'm a big fan of his work. He has done some amazing work in terms of how to look at innovation and innovator's dilemma and a whole bunch of things. He's no more, but he used to be he has some very amazing stories online. So I would encourage you to look at some of the work that Clayton Christensen has done. Yes, Abhay, you were trying to say something.
Analyze some questions. We are trying to do that, but you can continue on.
Okay. Sir, we okay?
Oh, okay.
All right. So let me give you a very interesting technique that Christensen sort of championed. It is called the JTBD. It's called jobs to be done. Okay. So when you are building a business and you're trying to solve a problem, typically when somebody is buying a solution or buying a product, they hire that product to do a service or a job that they need to get done. So, when I'm using this camera, I'm trying to use this to solve a particular problem that needs to be done. And how do you go find it? So he talks about observe, focus, and a process. Okay. So I'm going to give you the example that is from their book, or rather their article as well, about how they decided to, define a particular product. And this is a project they did for a restaurant, let's say McDonald's, on the milkshake part of the product. So the question that they got as a consulting team was, why do people buy milkshake? And what are they really doing with the milkshake? Why is it that they buy milkshakes? And what this team did was they spent, normally what you do is to go to restaurants, sit and see, observe when are people buying milkshakes? Why are they buying milkshakes? Are they buying it alone? Do they come with the family when they buy milkshake? Are they buying other food items and then buying milkshake and all of that stuff? And it just found out that, most of the people ended up buying milkshakes at 8 in the morning on their way to work. People came in alone. They were dressed for work. They were driving. They came in through the drive-through or otherwise, bought a milkshake, and then went on to drive. And later on, when they looked at it, they found that what is the job that they were hiring the milkshake to do? Now, they observed that most of the people who were buying this milkshake were buying this milkshake because they were on a commute, 20, 25 minutes, half an hour. Uh, they had rushed to this commute, so they didn't have enough time to have breakfast. And they were looking for something that would keep them busy for the 20 minutes and felt good, all of that stuff. And Milkshake really addressed that particular job that they needed somebody to help them during this whole process. And the example was, okay, fine, if they didn't buy milkshake, what else would they do? So sometimes people tried a banana that worked for a period, but it finished very quickly. And what do you do with the skin? You have to throw it somewhere. When you're doing something like a bagel, then all this crust falls on your clothes. It feels really not so good. When you're buying Snickers, it again finishes very quickly and you feel like you have done a lot of sugar. So, milkshake has this nice property. You can consume it very slowly. It sits in a cup inside the thing. You can check it at the end of it, and you have a nice 20 minutes of good feeling of drinking a milkshake while you are traveling, right? So again, very nice example of how milkshake was trying to solve the job. So if you are able to identify the desires that an individual has, the limitations of current processes, what are the likely custom solutions and catalysts and other things, then magic happens. And this is really what jobs to be done is all about. And then at that point, when you are able to meet your product meets the requirements of the job to get done, then people get into this nice cycle of saying that, what am I using instead of that? Can I reconsider it? Can I buy something different? So you have an existing solution that is there and you bring in a new solution that you want to do. If you do this analysis using jobs to be done and you are able to find a way to say that, I have a new product that is solving the problem better, quicker, faster or whatever, and I'm reducing uncertainty, I'm making it easier to work, I can make it a habit and you will get much better performance in some sense. So this is another technique that people use to say, when in a certain situation, I want to do this, so I can expect this outcome. So if you are able to articulate your problem in this kind of a form, then it gives you a good sense of what is the context in which you are trying to solve this problem, what is the motivation, and what is the expected outcome. And this is a good way to do this. And I find this technique to be very, very effective. And that's why I thought I'd share this with you. And if you relate this, this also makes sense in a PhD problem as well, that you have a particular situation. And then, how do I want to motivate that problem and see the expected outcome? So this is just some techniques that I'm sharing with you. There are many techniques that startups and founders use. The literature is full of papers, books, and other things on this topic. But I thought I'd get you started by thinking about these two ideas. One around this whole lean startup, which is basically go ask the customer, do these short cycles, try to figure out what you're trying to do, build experiments, measure the outcomes of those experiments, and then decide to pivot or preserve, and then repeat this thing and keep moving. Here again, something similar is what is being done. Sir, you want to say anything on this? Do you agree so far?
Yeah, surely. See, one of the other things which we often see is we get a lot of ideas and we want to implement them. That a lot of innovative people get ideas, but we never try to look at what is the customer's interest in that and who is going to be the person who is likely to use that product. And then we get stuck with that idea and then we fail in that whole process. So innovation is one part, And sometimes we often say that idea is ahead of time, then also it fails. And idea is sometimes late and therefore it fails. And therefore, right time and right juncture and taking customer into confidence, I think a market survey for that purpose. These are very important things for the business to succeed.
Exactly. And you said it right. You have an idea, but you don't know if it's going to work. How do you know if it's going to work? So there is a technique to follow. Can we follow that technique to find out if that idea makes sense or not? Can you